Hey everyone. So today I'm going to cover whys and hows related to GraphQL in Magento. And if you have any questions afterwards, you're welcome to join discussion. So I'm Alex Paliarush. I'm a Magento Core architect, and I've been with this company for over 7 years already. And today I will be happy if by the end of presentation you will understand what GraphQL is, like why do we need it for Magento, and what are steps to get it there, and what has been implemented and what we are working on right now, as well as how can you add coverage with GraphQL for your custom extension or Magento Core module. And lastly, we will take a look at how you can contribute to GraphQL project in Magento. So what is GraphQL? First of all, this is query language, and it has strictly defined schema which you can use to basically generate queries, and you can also get support for enhanced documentation. Also, GraphQL enables seamless evolution, and it allows you to duplicate fields or add new fields if you need to your APIs, so it simplifies evolution of your APIs. So the history behind GraphQL is that it was initially developed by Facebook and released in 2012 as the framework for their mobile applications. And they open sourced it in 2015, and right now it is in active development and adoption by different languages and frameworks. So the richest support for GraphQL is currently in JavaScript community, and you can find a lot of tools for server-side and client-side developers. However, in different other languages like PHP, for example, there is also pretty active community, and we are developing GraphQL for Magento in PHP, so you can join us here as well. So how GraphQL experience looks like for a developer who wants to work with it. The most powerful tool which you can use probably is GraphQL, and it is available as browser extension, or you can install it as standalone application. And here you can view full documentation. Since GraphQL has strictly typed language system, you can review all types available in your APIs and see what queries you can make, what mutations. Mutation, by the way, is a fancy name for commands, which is used in GraphQL. And you can perform searches for specific types defined here or fields. Also, this tool allows you to make queries in runtime. So you can define your query or mutation, you can combine multiple queries. You can provide arguments for the fields and just play with your APIs in runtime. There is also a way to specify variables, which is helpful in case of testing some queries which you want to cache eventually, let's say on JavaScript client, and you don't want to have variables in the query itself. You can provide them separately. And eventually in the middle window you can see the response which you get. And you can notice that the structure of response mimics the structure of request. And this is the nature of GraphQL. So basically, you get what you ask, and you don't get extra fields, so it prevents issues with over and under fetching. And basically, why do we need GraphQL in Magento? So before we answer that question, let's take a look, why do we need to invest in APIs in general? So benefits of investing in APIs include support for virtually any integration out there, so you can integrate with any system, and it gives you ultimate platform flexibility and business agility. Also, it unleashes your innovation potential, because now you can create customizations and just play with your APIs and try different integrations. It lowers total cost of ownership by minimizing integration efforts. So obviously, if you have good APIs, so you can easily integrate with any third-party system, and it can reduce total cost of ownership for you, and it streamlines Magento implementations as well. It also increases time to market, by accelerating development and shortening learning curve. And this is actually a consequence of being able to separate storefront development and backend development, like Piotr mentioned on previous talk on PWA. So on this slide, you can see a landscape of all companies and technologies which merchants can choose from if they develop their solution. And this shows how important integrations are nowadays and how important good APIs are. And basically, if you look carefully, you can see even Magento somewhere here. So, and by the way, this slide contains maybe around like 7,000 companies in different areas of e-commerce related space. So let's take a look at Web API evolution in Magento. First, we started from XML RPC, and this was pretty inconvenient because you had one endpoint and you had to send operation name and data for that operation, and there was no schema defined for APIs. Later, we introduced SOAP. Particularly, SOAP v2 had strictly defined operations, and you was able to generate, let's say, client-side proxies. This was specifically useful for strictly typed languages like Java and C#, and we still have some clients using SOAP. Recently, we tried to abandon it, but like we got feedback that, hey guys, we're still using it, please don't do that. And we've got REST in Magento 1 later, and the problem with Magento 1 was that we had all three implementations independent, and that's why you had to basically quadruple your support cost. So we had just regular action controllers, and also we had this REST API, SOAP API, and XML RPC. And in Magento 2, we resolved this issue by introducing service contracts, and now we have unified SOAP and REST APIs. So if you worked with Magento 2 web APIs, you know that you just have service contract and you create simple configuration file, and you are good to go with basically your web APIs. And now we're introducing GraphQL. So what is the best web API type out there? So before we answer that question, let's take a look at seemingly unrelated issue. So let's assume that this guy has a tree, and the question, what is best choice in his situation? Is it a shovel or Magento? And the answer actually depends on his scenarios. So if he just wants to plant a tree, then simple tool like a shovel will work for him. But if he wants to set up e-commerce solution and try to sell these trees, and then maybe Magento is better for him. So same is actually with web APIs, because web API is just a tool for integrating systems, and the best type of web API depends on the job you're trying to achieve. In some cases, even XML RPC might work, and it may be enough for you. So we are not looking at XML RPC and SOAP in general because they are pretty outdated technologies right now, so we'll be focusing on REST and GraphQL. And what GraphQL brings for API users, so this is like client-side developers. First of all, it gives efficiency when client decides what to fetch. And this actually leads to no over or under fetching. And that's why it minimizes number of calls, and additional benefit that you can get automatic query batching from client-side libraries. So basically what it does, let's say if client needs to make several queries at a time, framework will combine all these queries together, send them over HTTP as a single request, and on server side we will do the opposite process. So we'll split them, process them simultaneously or in parallel, or like sequentially, depending on like is it query, then it will be like in parallel. If it's mutation, it will be sequential to prevent race conditions. But eventually, server will process these multiple queries, combine them together, and send back to client. So this is a way of minimizing network load as well. It's also possible to set up per object ACL. So for example, if client requests like different object in the system and actually doesn't have access to some of them, he will get those objects which he can get access to, but he will just get null for the others, and there will be error messages in separate container, which will explain what exactly happened and why he didn't get everything he requested for. Schema introspection is a pretty powerful tool which allows for query generation on client side. Also, it enables rich documentation and really good tools for superior developer experience compared to REST. And one of those tools is this GraphQL, which we just looked at previously. Client-side performance is also a strength of GraphQL because libraries like Apollo project, for example, they have seamless caching mechanisms integrated in it and also query batching. So it allows you to improve performance at not cost to you at all. Partial success and exception handling can be issues because you basically have to expect partial failure in any case, and there could be some fields which are successfully resolved while the others are not. That's why you have to just expect for errors in every response. And with GraphQL, you get 200 HTTP status code response for any request, so you cannot rely on HTTP status code like you do in REST, for example. So what GraphQL means for API implementers? So previous slide was for API users, like client-side developers, and this is for API implementers, and particularly to Magento as implementer of APIs. So it adds actually complications for us, but it pays out if you look at client-side. So what complications are for us? It's like we need to think about enhanced DOS protection, because with GraphQL, it gives you flexibility to query whatever you want, but at the same time you can query like the whole Magento in one query, and we don't want to allow that because you just bring side down with one query. So we have to implement some sophisticated logic for query complexity limiting and nesting limiting. Also, it may be a lot of effort to properly cover the whole system with GraphQL, because we are not relying on service contracts like we have in REST and SOAP, when we just define configuration file and web API is there. So we made a decision not to do that for performance reasons. And we want to optimize GraphQL for our storefront use cases, and that's why you basically have to cover your functionality separately with GraphQL. And it also leads to the need to customize GraphQL API and service contracts separately. Consistency between queries, it is same issue as with any other API. If you have multiple teams and multiple people working on coverage, you need to ensure that API created by different teams is consistent. And server-side caching can be problematic by default because GraphQL sends all queries to single endpoint and all of them are post requests. And you may know that Varnish doesn't support post requests by default. And also, basically, there are some complications because of that. But there are workarounds, like we can allow, for example, GET requests along with POST requests, and then we can basically achieve Varnish caching capabilities as well. So other items which basically worth mentioning are basically framework implementation complexity is a little bit high with GraphQL. Server-side caching is a little bit more complex. Client-side caching is seamless. Because of strict typing, you get really good support for code generation, documentation, and also versioning is seamless with GraphQL. The item we should be aware of is that library availability may be limited for GraphQL because technology is still new compared to REST, and it means that it may not provide good support for your specific language. And the main benefit of GraphQL for Magento, in my opinion, is query flexibility and performance, considering that we never know what client needs are in Magento. We develop a platform, and we never know what requests clients are going to send. And with REST, this is a problem because we need to guess what data client will need. And with GraphQL, client decides what data they need. And if we implement our server side properly, then there will be no performance implications if client requests just one field or 15 fields. If he requests one field, he will get one field and he will get performance boost. So GraphQL in Magento is being developed in two phases. Phase one was internal development by internal Magento core teams. And currently we are in phase two, which is joint effort of community and core teams. So let's take a look what's GraphQL's place in Magento architecture. This is like vision for GraphQL's place. So we have storefront integrations and admin integrations. So GraphQL is meant to be the main API for storefronts eventually. So it's going to replace REST. REST and SOAP are still going to be integration points for admin panels. On domain layer, we have resolvers, which is specific to GraphQL. Then we have service contracts and models, which you probably already know about. Then we have persistence layer, and we have normalized storage and denormalized storage, which is basically our index tables and our indexes. Typical requests in web APIs, in REST and SOAP, go basically through service contracts. So our web API framework converts your incoming JSON query, let's say, in REST into our objects and just make service contract call. Service contracts in its turn can rely on models, resource models, collections, which eventually for admin go to normalized storage. This is important because in admin we want to see actual data all the time. We cannot rely on eventually consistent data provided by indexes. In GraphQL, such flow is also possible. For example, if you want to generate customer token, we can use existing service contract from GraphQL resolver, and it will be pretty trivial implementation. There are also use cases when we can bypass service contracts for, let's say, performance benefits. And some cases when we want to hit denormalized storage, our indexes. And one of the examples is our current implementation for products query, where for performance optimization, we do not use service contracts and we rely on collections which use our indexes eventually. And if you try to hit our query for products right now, you will get data in same way as you do when you hit storefront. And in the future, we are planning to add our query API implementation on persistence layer level, and it will allow us to convert GraphQL query directly to MySQL query. And this is where we will get the ultimate performance benefit, because we will not even query from database fields which are not required by client application. So what has been done in phase 1? We added queries support. We also allowed for extensibility by schema stitching. This is term for schema merging, basically. So we allow modularity for your schema. You can define some fields in one module, the other fields in the other module, and eventually it will be merged, and you will get declaration for your entity combined, and it will be single schema. We also defined resolver interface, and we have some solution for performance issues. I will give example later. We have examples of schema lazy loading and using collections over services. Also, we added support for AV attributes. Right now, they're supported without any containers on top level, and since everything in GraphQL resolves to scalar types, it's strictly typed language. That's why even AV attributes, you can see them, let's say, on product entity declaration. You can see each AV attribute available at the moment, and you can see type for each of them. We also have examples of implementing customer authorization and authentication, as well as we implemented query nesting analysis. So what was covered in phase 1 by internal teams? It was product query, so we support all product types. We support search and filtering, sorting, pagination, pricing, layered navigation, and this is really good example because if we can implement support for products, which is the most complex entity in Magento, then it means that we can implement support for anything else in GraphQL. And use cases which are covered by products query is you can render product detail page, product listing, products in the cart, wish list, widgets. In addition, we have coverage for category, customers, and URL resolvers. And this in its turn cover use cases for category page rendering, customer info page, and one of PWA scenarios when we need to resolve what entity is behind specific URL. Phase 2 of GraphQL, as I mentioned, is joint effort of core engineering and community engineering and community, Magento Community. Some of this has been already implemented, and some of this work is in progress. So we are working on security. Internally, it's going to be security analysis by our security team. We also get query complexity analysis already implemented by our community. And we are going to actively work on coverage for checkout, my account, CMS, and we are going to enhance and fix bugs in our catalog URL resolver and basically catalog products and category APIs. In addition to that, we are going to improve our framework capabilities and performance. So we're going to introduce Query API and improve GraphQL caching. So how do you add new coverage? This is actually two or optionally three-step process. First of all, you need to define your schema. For that, you go to your configuration and define schema GraphQL as file. And any GraphQL configuration is defined in so-called SDL. This is GraphQL Schema Definition Language, which has top-level type called query and mutation for queries and commands, respectively. So if you want to define, let's say, customer query, you just declare a new field under query type. And you also need to define resolver, which defines how this data should be fetched. It can be fetched, let's say, from database or from third-party API or like whatever. Then we can define a field which has specific type. And if it's complex type, it should be defined somewhere in this file or any other configuration file for GraphQL in Magento. Types could be arrays, complex types or scalar types. And again, if it's complex type, it should be defined somewhere. We also support scalars like string, integer, float, boolean, identifier. You can also add documentation. So the second step is to define resolver, which defines basically how do you fetch data from database or wherever you store your data when somebody requests the query. All resolvers must implement resolver interface, and you will get access to information about schema and the query. So all that will be parsed and you will get access to it in form of objects. I will not focus on this in details, but basically you can receive any information you need to resolve specific field via arguments of resolver. And we have examples of user authentication, like customer authentication. And what you have to do in your resolver is basically to generate data which matches your schema. So in this case, it will just give you associative array with user data, and you just return this array, and that's it. So the more complex scenario is solving n plus 1 problem is basically if you have configurable, let's say, and you want to fetch all of its options, like you have 100 options, it will result into 1 plus n, which is 100 queries. To optimize that, you can try to query all 100 simple products in one query, and it's possible to do with deferred value resolution. I will not focus in details because I believe we have limited time, but so we have solution for that, which is deferred value resolution. And the third optional step is to write test for your functionality. So let's assume that you created new query or mutation. Then you have a framework. So we extended our REST and SOAP framework with our GraphQL abstract test case. And you need to extend it, and you still have access to fixtures like you have in REST and SOAP APIs. And you need to define a query like you would do in GraphQL. And you can just define it in GraphQL, copy paste here, and execute the query. In result, you will get associative array or scalar depending on like what type you had. And you can perform assertions here. So how do you contribute? We have GraphQL CE community project, which is specifically for GraphQL. And if you go to wiki page, you will see the box on the right, which has references to our ZenHub board, which is our Scrum board for all GraphQL related issues. We also have links to our recorded meetings and weekly meetings. You can join GraphQL Slack channel, and you can view roadmap. So as I said, we have ZenHub board. If you would like to join the project, you can pick up tasks from ready to start column. These are the most groomed and understandable issues. If you have specific issues that you would like to work on, you can reach out to us directly and we can discuss your issue and we can definitely work together. And our backlog currently contains around 90 issues, some of which are groomed and some of which still require grooming, but you are always welcome to join us. And lastly, I would like to give just a word of appreciation to people who have already contributed to GraphQL Community project, and some guys were added here just yesterday after contribution day, which we did yesterday, and basically our community, GraphQL community, is growing, and from our side, we are trying to make experience of contributors as fun and exciting as possible. So we're trying to remove some unexciting parts like documentation writing, test writing, sometimes design. Not everybody has enough strengths to come after their day job and work on some complex design. People just sometimes want just to sit and code, and we provide that opportunity. Like if you that kind of person, feel free to join. If you would like to work on design, we have people who are more keen on complex issues, so we also have a lot of design required for GraphQL. So if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer now, or if you don't have time, then you can reach out to me at Magento booth later. So any questions?
So the progressive web applications, will they work without this, or they need this to work?
So right now the idea is that this is one of the foundational pieces for PWA, and PWA is one of our main clients. So PWA is going to be built on GraphQL.
So one more question. So this is going to be only for reading the database. You will not going to do the writing to Magento database functionality.
We will. So we have queries and we have mutations. So mutation, it's called mutation in GraphQL, but it's actually a query command. So it's like, let's say if you want to add product to cart, you have command.
But say if I want to ship the order and I don't want to execute a function that ships the whole order, will that be ever part of?
So whatever is available to customer on storefront will be available in GraphQL.
Okay.
Admin operations will not be available. So for admin, we still have REST and so, but for any use cases that you currently have on storefront, we should have GraphQL coverage.
Understand. Yep.
Anyone else? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, so if no questions, then thanks.